It's time for my virtual Jericho with John Mair.
Hello and welcome to a very special and a very significant My Jericho. It's all about the Boatyard. What's the latest there? This month there's a short, sharp consultation period on new plans, and that's open. See the purple notices on the lamppost in Canal Street if you want more details. The plans are very, very ambitious, as you will hear, but in a My Jericho exclusive we can reveal they do not, repeat, do not include a bridge over the canal. That's right, you heard it right, there'll be no bridge over the canal. That's been kiboshed by the Canal and River Trust and Department of the Environment. It rather changes things. More later, as you hear from Stephen Green, who's the consultant on this project, Dougal Anderson, who's the architect, and the man with the money, developer Oliver Holland. Meanwhile, let's look at what the site is like today. There's a huge hole in the canal side centre of Jericho, the biggest vacant space in central Oxford. Just a pile of mud and old buildings around the Jewel and the Crown, St Barnabas Church. It's a daily reminder of what might have been. The Boatyard saga has been going on for 3 decades, since the last repaired boat left the yard in 1990. That ended 2 centuries of the work in the yard. In 2005, the Battle of Jericho was fought hand to hand as British Waterways evicted boaters from the land. Remember these dramatic...
First of all, there was a siren, and everyone thought, oh, right, we haven't been prepared. You know, everyone was trying to get prepared. But because everyone's got lives as well as the eviction, you know, people are working or people have got children, and it's just everyone was always sort of quite busy, as you can imagine. And then when the actual eviction came, the day came, it was just unexpected. So I think about 5:30, maybe quarter to 6, between 5:30 and 5:45 in the morning, there was a knock on the door.
You're in, Rod! Slip, beautiful, your war, you're in! British Waterways sell the last working wharf in Oxford.
I had about 6 police officers knock on the boat to try and wake me up. I came out and they gave me to 6:30 to
I'll get changed, I'll put my
move all my property off the bank. Gave me to 7 o'clock to move my boat off there and remoor over this side, all the other way to arrest us. So there's about 4 or 5 of us, grabbed all our gear, hold it on boats, but I used other boats here to put gear on as well. Because the likelihood of us getting arrested we didn't want.
What happened was that I was walking down the street and I saw one of these extremely large cranes coming down the street, and as he stopped, I spoke to the driver and asked him if he was coming down to the Boatyard. He lied to me and told me that he had nothing to do with the Boatyard, but I had an idea that he was coming down here. So I followed him down, and due to the size of his vehicle, he was driving quite slowly. And as he came to turn into the Boatyard, I jumped in front of the vehicle, got the D-lock out and tried to lock onto his brake lines, but unfortunately 3 coppers pounced on me as soon as I tried it and got me away before I managed to lock on. Which fortunately means that I haven't been arrested, but unfortunately means that I didn't manage to slow down the process that's going on here at the moment.
That was, of course, in 2006, not 2005, as I mistakenly said. This is now 2021, and new plans are going through Oxford City Council planning and should emerge later this year. Chartered surveyor Stephen Green is charged with making it all happen. He's the development consultant on the Jericho Canalside project. Stephen says he's refurbished or restored 90 listed buildings and created 150 more in conservation areas all over England in his career. Stephen, tell us about the plans.
Thank you, John. First of all, good evening, everybody. Can I just say what a privilege it has been for me to be able to work on this rather special site in the centre of Oxford and so close to a beautiful Grade 1 listed church. I'll just pick up from where John Mair was on the closure of the Boatyard 29 years ago in 1992, I think it was. If we follow on from there, the site was sold by British Waterways in 2000 to a company called Bellway Homes, a residential developer from the Midlands. They prepared a scheme for 46 flats and 1 dock. They submitted for planning. That was refused, and they appealed. The appeal was dismissed at a public inquiry. So they then sold the site to Spring Residential, another Midlands-based residential company who submitted, surprisingly, a very similar scheme of 40 flats plus 1 dock, and unsurprisingly, this was refused at planning, and subsequent appeal was dismissed at public inquiry. Credit should go to Oxford City Council planners and to the community, spearheaded by JWT, in opposing these 2 inappropriate schemes. So we move on to 2013, where Oxford City Council took the initiative and prepared a strategic planning document, otherwise known as an SPD, which set out the planning gains that the council wanted to see from the site. 2 of the most significant of these were a new piazza to put the Grade 1 listed church in a much better setting, and also an improved canal crossing, together with a site for a community boatyard and a site for a community centre. My original client, SIAF, acquired the site from the receivers of Spring Residential in 2013 as well. And there then followed a period of 2 years of consultation with the community and various stakeholders. And the content of that scheme included a new boatyard with 3 docks, a cafe, a community centre with offices, the dance studio, badminton hall as phase 1, and with offices and a preschool with a private garden as phase 2. In 2015, there was a resolution to grant consent for the scheme, and in 2016, this was cemented with the conclusion of a Section 106 legal agreement. Now, unfortunately, this scheme was not implemented due to a combination of factors, including the community's requirement to have a 3-year period to raise the funds to build the community centre. That, with other cumulative elements, rendered the scheme unviable. So we went back to square one, continued the negotiations with the community and with JWT. And one day, one of the JWT trustees suggested that we look at the option of building phase 1 of the community centre. The reason being that in the previous scheme, we were building the boatyard and we were going to leave a deck ready to take on the new community centre. But if it was going to take 3 years to raise the money to build that, and there may not be a guarantee that money could be raised, we would be left with a single-story boatyard with a flat roof, and it just wouldn't complement the setting of the church as it should. So we took the step of offering to build phase 1 of the community centre to Shell, and we prepared some new plans incorporating 2 docks plus building community centre phase 1 to Shell, and that has formed the basis of the initial proposal for this revised scheme. That was then amplified because it was requested that we provide 3 docks, and having looked at the numbers, we said that the additional dock would have to be paid for by the JWT. And in addition, any increase in the footprint would also have to be, the cost of that would have to be met by JWT. And that's the basis on which we worked together, and we produced the scheme, which we then subsequently held an exhibition in the church in August, September 2019. That was followed up by a presentation at the Institute in December 2019. And the scheme has remained, to a certain extent, largely unchanged since revised proposals following those 2 meetings. Now, the potential outcomes of this scheme would be that the buildings surrounding the piazza would all be completed simultaneously. The other gain is that of the £7 million plus potential cost of the boatyard and community centre, over £4 million of that would be provided by the developer in building those 2 elements I've described. That there is also a third benefit, and that is that having raised this money in the form of matching funding, it will be much easier for the additional costs of phase 2 of the community centre to be raised. In 2020, various things happened. The council produced their new local plan. There were certain implications in that we had to take on board and adjust. The other thing that happened was the council declared a climate emergency, as have many councils in the UK. And also, as a byproduct of this, the 1 in 100 year plus climate change flood datum changed, and the whole flood datum measurement increased by 600 mil. So that's basically everything had to be redesigned to accommodate a 2-foot rise in the potential 1 in 100 year flood. The other thing that's happened in 2021 is that we've had these 2 objections on the issue of a bridge. We worked hard on the bridge. We looked at 11 different options with the Canal and River Trust and with JWT over a period of many months. The latest objections come hard on the heels of this increase in flood risk, with the Environment Agency considering that the bridge abutments, although it's a fixed bridge, so it has a vaulted soffit over the canal, they're concerned about the bridge abutments causing an obstruction to the flow of floodwater. There is another issue as well, that the bridge into the square would cause problems of visibility and as such present a navigational hazard on the canal. We would like to have a bridge. We've had various discussions with Michael Barnes regarding his ideas on a Song Dynasty bridge, but we cannot proceed with objections from the Environment Agency and the Canal and River Trust. we have discussed the possibility of ring fencing the finance that was to be made available for the bridge, in the hope that some other option could be found to achieve an enhanced crossing of the canal. Now, we've ended up with a scheme which is, in many respects, a great enhancement over the brief, because if you remember, the brief sought for the developer to provide a site for a community centre and a site for a boatyard. And in actual practice, the developer is providing the boatyard and phase one of the community centre. If you look at the community centre as it exists, it's just about 4,000 square feet. If you look at the new community centre and combine phases 1 and 2, the total is 19,500 square feet. So that's a more than fourfold increase in the size of the community centre and the wide range of facilities that it offers. This scheme has taken 8 years so far. It's enormously complicated, and to give you an indication, we have no fewer than 20 specialist firms, all experts in their field. To give you an idea, we're dealing with archaeology, the impact on listed buildings, acoustics, energy use, highways, quantity surveying, arboricultural, building control, flood risk, hydrology, and last but certainly by no means least, architecture. And I'd shortly like to hand you over to Dougal Anderson, who is the architect on the scheme. That's me done.
Okay, Stephen, I'm going to ask you just two or three questions. Is the bridge definitely dead? Is that parrot dead?
Well, first of all, the council's brief talks about providing an improved canal crossing. In our view, the best crossing we could achieve would be a new bridge. There is a bridge at Mount Place, which has its deficiencies, but it has been used for want of any other better option for many decades. The lease on that bridge comes to an end, I believe, later this year. So there's a real urgency to get something in place. As I say, we thought the idea of a Song Dynasty bridge was very exciting, but you know, at the end of the day, we have to take these objections from the Environment Agency and the Canal and River Trust quite seriously, because they are objections based on concerns for safety.
So that means no, the bridge will probably never be built.
Well, we have to explore all the options, John, and JWT are looking at it. We're looking at it, and we've said that, or clients have said that they will ring fence the money that was allocated for the bridge so that it can be used in the future if we find a suitable solution.
Let's look at the other objection, the JWT, about the size of the piazza. They've had a report commissioned which said it's too small. You know, they want something far bigger. What's your view on that? Well,
yes, in a perfect world, it would be nice to have a huge piazza. I mean, I'll start with the premise. I mean, it's a bit. Well, there is no piazza at the moment, is there? So we need a scheme to provide a piazza. The reason it's slightly smaller than the previous piazza, the previous scheme, is because 60% of that reduction is caused by the additional residential required to provide the subsidy for building phase 1 community centre. The second element is the 40% reduction that remains is due to the fact that the boatyard has got bigger. The footprint of the boatyard has got bigger. A, because a third dock has been included from our previous design for 2, and also the distance between the docks has been increased. And we took the view, You know, if we're faced with having a slightly bigger piazza, but not building phase one, or building phase one and having a slightly smaller piazza, surely the first option, building phase one to complete the piazza and the enclosure by all the buildings on the piazza, that's got to be the best option, hasn't it?
Yes, I mean, so it's swings and roundabouts, you're saying. If you want that, you can't have that.
Well, it is. You have to look at these things holistically, don't you? Because it's all interrelated.
Is this your most difficult project to date?
John, every project is difficult. Everything has got a lot more difficult anyway. We've just finished a scheme in Bath where we restored the Somerset Place, which is a crescent that was occupied by Bath Spa University. There were 16 listed buildings, some of which had been bombed and rebuilt after the war. And it took strangely enough, from 2006 to 2019 to complete that scheme. And we had, I think, 24 different professional firms working on that. So it's difficult. And actually, if you think about it, you know, we're in Jericho after 29 years, 8 of which have been spent designing this scheme. About 7 of those years previously were spent on aborted schemes that were refused at planning and subsequent appeals. And, you know, I think the people of Jericho deserve better, to be honest.
Okay, we'll come back to you later on. Let's move on to Dougal, if we can. I mean, all dreams need dream makers to realise them. Dougal Anderson and Stride Tregowan, you were the design brain behind the new scheme. You helped forming this, as you saw from your presentation in the community centre 18 months ago. Very, very good it was too. You specialise in designing projects in conservation areas or those of historical significance all over the country. Over to you. Tell us about your dream.
Thank you, John. I think it's a shared dream with the whole community, really. For an architect, it is a fantastic project. It's quite rare to get a project that sits so deeply within the community, which would bring about multifaceted improvements, connecting to a historic building, creating a lovely place. So it's a wonderful project to you know, roll up one's sleeves and get grappling with, and even more so if we can actually get the spades in the ground, because there's quite a lot of challenges and interesting elements to deal with the further we go on. What I'd like to do today is just to build on Stephen's introduction, as it were, and just to talk about the detail of the scheme as it is currently, because remember, the planning submission of the scheme was submitted in May 2020, so it's been some months now since we actually submitted the scheme, and that was, of course, a design which included a bridge which connected the west side of the towpath into the proposed piazza. And I'll go into a bit of detail, as Stephen has mentioned, about the issues which have meant that the bridge has now been omitted from the scheme. It's quite important if you could follow my cursor on the screen as well as I identify the different elements. And also just to say that the full set of planning documents are available to view on the Oxford City Council website. So I'm showing a select here due to just giving an overview and not going into too much detail, but you can see the numbers of documents, etc., and the full scheme is available to view on the council's website. So to just update on the current status of the scheme here, and on the drawing on the screen, if you can orientate, or if to help you orientate, this is the St Barnabas Church here, obviously a significant aspect being a Grade 1 listed building. So the scheme effectively as previously displayed on public consultations and previous presentations, has remained fundamentally the same with the exception of the bridge. So it falls into 4 main constituent parts. On the north side of the site, we have the Boatyard and Community Centre building proposed. Then on the south side of the site, we have the private residential housing proposed. So both those elements, the Boatyard and Community Centre and aspects of the residential, will face onto the centrepiece, the piazza and the west elevation of St Barnabas Church. And we're also proposing a new access into St Barnabas Church, which allows for effectively level access without ramps, etc., into the church, and with the idea of bringing the original entrances into play and really completing what we would see as the aspiration of the church to front a public space, which is never really done in past. And then the other element of the scheme is the existing community centre, which is being converted into 6 apartments. So if I go on to the next slide, I can talk about the actual detail of the scheme. One can see in the Boatyard here, 3 docks are being provided, 1 wet dock and 2 dry docks for the community to use. And then this line here, if you follow my cursor, will form the boundary of phase 1 of the community centre. So at the ground level of the community centre in phase 1, we would have a cafe and a shop and offices for the Boatyard. And then on the upper floors, there would be a badminton hall, further cafe spaces, and a dance hall, as well as offices for use with the community. Beyond this line towards the east here, towards Canal Street, would be phase 2, which the constituent parts of that would be a preschool nursery on the ground floor with its own private garden. And then above that would be offices for the trust to utilise or to let out in how it sees fit. And then in terms of the actual access to the Boatyard, there is a basin, which I will go into a little bit more detail about on the following slides. In terms of the residential element, we have proposed 18 dwellings altogether for private sale, which effectively link Cardigan Street, the Piazza and the canal side into a single terrace composed of 15 townhouses and 3 apartments, which are on the south side, incorporating parking as well for all the residential. And then finally, the community centre conversion here would comprise of 6 apartments being converted into affordable flats. Now, as Stephen mentioned earlier, following almost 9 months of consultee negotiations, etc., with various bodies such as the Canal and River Trust, the Environment Agency, the outcome just in the last month or so was the sad decision ultimately by the statutory authorities that they could not support a bridge across the canal into the Piazza, fundamentally for 2 reasons. One being that a bridge on the environmental agency side, a bridge would hinder flood water, which is quite a severe consideration now in terms of our impending climate change. And then from the Canal and River side, Canal and River Trust side of things, It was significantly a matter of navigational safety and visibility, and also towpath safety, because of clearances bridges require. And unfortunately, the constraints we had in this scenario was too great for them to be able to support. In fact, they objected to it. Another aspect of the scheme worth mentioning was that physically, the removal of the bridge retains the rest of the scheme in a similar footprint. However, the management is altered, because previously the basin was acting both as an entrance into the boatyard as well as a winding hole, and that combined with the bridge was also of a concern to the statutory authorities. So the current proposal is for the basin to be actually controlled by the boatyard, which allows for temporary mooring while there's a crossover of boats coming in and out of the actual docks themselves. And as such, you can see there's a chain and buoy proposed to help control this area so that it wouldn't be used for turning. So effectively, in all respects, the canal element of the existing canal effectively remains as it is in terms of its alignment. If I move on to this drawing, I'd just like to explain the amount of detail we had to provide and work through in terms of the flood mitigation. As Stephen said, the national modelling of floodwater levels have altered in the last couple of years. So even since this previous application, which was approved in 2016, flood levels have changed, and the site, and in fact most of Jericho, actually sits inside a floodplain. Now, in achieving a building of any kind in this site, we have to meet two criteria really, or three criteria. One, that it would be safe for use. Two, that it wouldn't impact on the actual volume of the existing floodplain. And three, it has to meet the requirements of flood water movement. So it's not just volume, it's actual water movement. So you can see here, this drawing displays the actual dock, which is going to be designed as a robust building to allow it to flood, which seems obvious in its sense, in that water is allowed into the building. But you can see with all these red arrows, the Environment Agency wasn't satisfied that the water the sluice gates could just be opened and allow it to flood. We had to put additional holes into the building to allow water flow to mitigate flooding with any impact elsewhere. And as such, the building had to incorporate open grills, etc., down at the low level. I move on to the next slide. This slide, slightly prettier drawing compared to the others, is providing some detail for the planning department in terms of the proposed materials for the community centre and boatyard. And what underpins the design approach in the scheme is creating buildings which would sit comfortably within an environment that actually respects its historical past and its current context. So therefore, the canal side buildings, being the boatyard and including the hall and dance studios on the upper floor of the community centre, is actually designed as a vernacular industrial type of building, which has direct connection and connotations with the canal's industrial past. And then coming up Dawson Place towards Canal Street, there's a slightly different change of character in that we're bringing in the idea of tying in with the Jericho brickwork, looking at various forms of brickwork to connect with the local scene. And this image here displays the canal-side elevation, again highlighting the community centre as a fairly industrial-looking building sitting within the setting of the church and the piazza, and then showing all the low-level grills that allows for flooding. This image here demonstrates the approach for the residential aspect, again picking up a bit of a cross between a vernacular and industrial mix that's commonly found on waterside buildings, again, but tying into the locality with the use of the variable Jericho brick patterns. And this is the finishing slide, actually, just to show the intent of the quality of the scheme doesn't stop at the building, because of most importance really is the landscaping and how the finishes are on the ground in the public spaces. So we're proposing here high quality materials using natural stone cobbles mixed with paving slabs, which would give a high quality and rich finish to the public areas. And an aspect to also bear in mind is that in the SBD there was a call for some form of artwork to be incorporated into the overall proposals, and here we are identifying artwork inlaid into the piazza, and the final design is open really for where we when we hopefully move on further. And that concludes my presentation, John. Thank you very much.
Okay, let me ask you 2 or 3 questions as well. This question I asked you, is the bridge firmly dead? Is the parrot dead?
My answer refers back to Stephen, because it's sad to lose the bridge in that location, but when one has statutory authorities objecting on health and safety grounds, it becomes virtually an impossible thing to try and deliver. So the bridge doesn't necessarily have to be dead, but the ability to have it in this location combined with the navigational traffic makes it a very difficult element to negotiate.
So how will people get to the station from Jericho?
There's an existing bridge.
So they'll have to come out and go back in. If they're in the community centre, for example, have to go down Canal Street and over the Mount Place Bridge, correct?
Effectively, as it stands at the moment, this would be the case.
Were you surprised at the vehemence of the objection? I've seen the letter from the Canal and River Trust. Were you surprised at how much they objected to?
I was, simply because of the length of time that it took to get to the point of being so vehement. They always raise concerns. We've had this idea on the table and in discussion with the inclusion of the CRT in pre-applications since 2018 at least, possibly earlier. So it was a surprise and a disappointment when they went to the highest authority in their organisation to conclude this with a very significant objection.
I mean, because they also say they want you to provide 5 extra parking spaces for boats because you're going to be taking up that space. Have you taken that aboard?
Well, the scenario now is without the bridge, that issue has gone away because, as I mentioned in the presentation, the canal itself remains, in this scenario, the canal itself remains as it is currently. So there's no loss of mooring. But certainly with a bridge, there is a loss of mooring because the rules identify that you can't moor under a bridge.
Is this the most difficult project you've undertaken? Because you've done lots of other work in Bath and other places.
They all have their challenges. This is actually a very enjoyable project. I'm not sure what difficulty actually means, because every project comes with various challenges and objections from all parties, you know, and sometimes support. No, I wouldn't say it's the most difficult. It's one of the most enjoyable, actually. One of the most exciting, I would say.
A timescale, Dougal. When do you think, if it goes to plan, this will all be built?
I would say that's more of a question for the developers, because the timescale for construction from a starting point is probably in the region of 24 months. But it's Oliver or Stephen would be able to explain more in detail in terms of the starting point, because there's quite a lot of negotiations that we'd have to enter into with the Canal and River Trust to do the engineering works. So there's pre-works before the main works can start.
And the earliest you can start is October because of the canal. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So do you think your dream would be realised if you were a betting man? What would you say the chances of this dream becoming reality were?
I would hope so. It's a fantastic opportunity, and it's always disappointing for an architect. As an architect, you know, I'm always disappointed when the designs stay on paper, and I'm fortunate enough that quite a lot of projects I've designed have come to fruition, and but ultimately it's got to work. It has to. Somebody has to pay for it, and that's what it all depends on. Sadly, as you know, as an architect, we could be as virtuous as we'd like to be, but we also have the privilege of spending someone else's money, which is, you know, which is a nicer place to be in some ways than actually pocketing it yourself, or extracting it from your own pockets rather.
Now, a last question for me: how much of your life have you devoted to this particular project? If you were to do a timesheet, how many days, months, years have you spent on it? Gosh,
it goes in spikes, I suppose. I came on board. I keep saying I'm quite a new boy in this, because I only joined in 2017, where we were trying to work out a deliverable brief. And I worked with Stephen, where we started on looking at 2 docks and how that would generate a building combined with housing, etc. And then had consultations with the JWT. Difficult to put a time frame on it, really, as it goes. It's like a sine wave. You have sort of you know, the major aspects of a design. Once a brief is put together, takes a number of months, but then once we've submitted, we submitted the planning application in May, but the designs were pretty much drawn up for maybe 6 months prior to that, with lots of little tweaks. Difficult to quantify, John. I'm sorry.
On balance, are you still hopeful, yes or no, that this will be built?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's move on. You mentioned him, to the man with the money. Oliver Holland from Cornerstone Land, the developers. They're trying to put their money where others' mouths are. Oliver, how do you see the near and the not so near future for the Boatyard site? Over to you.
Thanks very much. I guess it's probably useful as a starting point to just introduce Cornerstone Land as a developer into the site. Stephen's talked about the previous occupants and the previous owners of the Boatyard as Bellway Homes, for example, and also Spring Residential, who were both large Midlands-based organisations. I think one point that I would like to make is where we differ is that we are Oxford-based. Our office is in Begbrook, near Kidlington, and where an organisation like Bellway has close to 3,000 employees, we are of a significantly smaller scale. We're less than 10 people on a day-to-day basis. So Our focus is very much on Oxford and on Jericho. Indeed, our track record as Cornerstone or as individuals, the founders from Cornerstone, is in schemes in central Oxford. So we've, for example, John, we talked about it off air, but the scheme on Cranham Street, Grantham House, was one that we've been involved in, which was a 1960s local authority built sheltered housing building that ultimately was shut by the council because it couldn't be brought to a decent home standard. And we took that on. It had a planning permission in place when we became involved, and we delivered 27 flats there and 2 houses in the centre of Jericho, and it's been extremely well received. So that's the type of product that we like to deliver. We've, I suppose, developed a small track record for what I would call local regeneration, where we've taken assets that have perhaps fallen out of favour or are in a use that isn't their best. And I mean that in a planning use class sense rather than in a typical sort of everyday use. And another example of that is Kirkley House in Summertown, which is on Mayfield Road, where, again, a building that was originally built by an institution, in this instance it was Oxfam, in the early 1990s as a sort of a printing space and a subsidiary office for them. Ultimately that became redundant. It was bought by Summerfield School, and I think it was in mid-2000, 2006, and the school then sought planning permission for an educational use, which was never implemented. There was then another application for medical use, which again was never implemented, and ultimately the scheme was granted planning permission for 3 houses. We then at that point came aboard and delivered those houses, and again they've been, I think, very well received. Certainly the occupants of them have enjoyed their time in them. So I think it's just important for me, I guess, to stress our local presence. You can see in the top of the screen that we are Oxford based, and I hope that that in some way perhaps alleviates some of the fears of local residents, where perhaps in the past it was perceived that it was the big bad developer that was coming in and was seeking to exploit the site. We're very much not of that ilk. We're here for the long term, and we're looking to deliver something that we and the residents can be proud of. I suppose in that vein, it would be foolish for me not to talk about the scheme as it stands now. Stephen talked about the history and exactly the sort of the course that the Boatyard has taken. If you look at the first scheme, for example, clearly that was rejected because it wasn't appropriate for the site. The second scheme likewise. And when you get to the third application, which was ultimately approved but not delivered, you start to realise the complexities of the site. And that, on reflection, wasn't delivered because it wasn't viable. With Stephen touched upon the 3 years that it would have taken the local residents and the JWT to raise the funds that were necessary. And so this application, with its amendments now, I think needs to be viewed almost independently from those. We have to look at the situation that we're faced with now. Clearly there are, what I would consider there are benefits from the previous scheme, but there are also things that we've ultimately not been able to deliver on. The bridge is something that we've touched on clearly, which is out of our control. But I think we're at the point now in this area, but also in terms of sort of wider environmental factors we've touched upon, the climate change, that we have to sort of focus on what is deliverable for this scheme now, because delays are only going to hurt the prospects for the Boatyard. I suspect if there hadn't been the delays that had occurred and the flood levels hadn't risen in the same way that they have now, or been deemed to have risen by the council, then the former scheme might have been deliverable, and the bridge likewise. So I guess I'm just keen for this application now, with the changes that we've been forced to make, to be viewed in the context in which they are really raised now with everything that is going on the site, but also outside it.
Okay, Oliver, you're not a carpetbagger, as you've said. You're Oxford based. How much are you planning to spend, and where's the money going to come from?
I mean, I don't want to go into the very fine details of our cost plan for the site. We are privately funded, so at the moment we will be sort of seeking to deliver this scheme. Once we've got planning, we will be going out to raise funds to deliver it, and that's a project that we're very keen to work on. We have a very close relationship with a professional, Oxford-based professional team. So the projects that I've mentioned and others that we've delivered in Aston, Westfield House is another. We've delivered with a partner, a building contractor, Dayton's, who again are Oxfordshire-based. So that is our plan. We're keen to use local expertise and to be involved in the long haul of this project.
Okay, well, give us a rough idea. What's the rough rate of return you're going to be offering your investors?
But we haven't got that far yet. It's not. We're very much focused on this planning application. Once we get to that stage and we've secured it, then we can go into finer detail on exactly the progress that we're going to take with raising the funds necessary.
Have you done the sums yet? How much has this cost you to get it this far?
You're going to ask me the same question. Yes, no, we obviously have done the sums, and we are the beneficiaries in some way of a lot of work that's been undertaken by Stephen and the professional team that was appointed by the previous owners of the scheme. So we haven't borne the full cost of everything that has been worked on, the 3 applications over the last 30 years. But we're certainly invested in this scheme in a serious way.
If it collapses, what happens then? If we go back to zero, what happens then?
Well, if it collapses, then it wouldn't be a project that we're involved in. So ultimately, that's not really a question for me. We're committed to working on the scheme to get it to a position where ultimately everything that is in the planning application is delivered, and we can provide a perfect setting for the church and a community centre that the local residents are able to use.
I'm going to ask all 3 of you just one last question, if I could see all 3, please. Are you really, really hopeful that this is going to happen? Who would like to go first?
I'll continue speaking. I'm extremely hopeful. We've worked really hard on this planning application to deliver what we think is the most appropriate project for the site. Clearly, we've had setbacks that we've touched on, the bridge being the largest of those, and it is extremely disappointing from a personal perspective not to be able to deliver that bridge. But we have to be able to deliver as much as we can to be able to deliver anything, and that seems a silly thing to say, but Stephen touched on it earlier, and the way that we want to see this through means that, and with all of the work that's gone past, means I am extremely hopeful that we can deliver it.
Stephen, you wanted to speak. We're slightly run out of time. Are you hopeful?
Well, I hope so, and I hope so as well for people of the community, because as Bruce Hegarty says in the design and access statement, there are something like 400 canal boats which operate on the canal, and for some people they're their principal place of residence, and where do they repair their boats? The boat ownership and occupancy on the canal has increased dramatically since the Boatyard shut in the first place. As I said earlier, the developers have gone that extra mile or extra 2 miles in providing a scheme which they're building more than is required by the planning brief. And I think it would be a shame if this opportunity was let go. And if it is let go, what are we going to see? Are we going to see a series of, well, what do we see? We saw 12 wasted years when the Midland developers were going through the motions and going to public inquiries. A public inquiry takes about 2 years to happen. And with COVID, no one's actually mentioned COVID today, but COVID is going to have a huge impact on things like that because of the backlog of things that haven't been happening. Does the community really want to get involved in a 2 or 4 year, saga of public inquiries and things? I mean, let's move on. Let's try and get something put back into place. And I think you've seen the visuals. It's a good-looking scheme, and it ticks so many boxes.
Let's move on, if we can, Stephen. Just finally to Dougal, do you dream of this scheme being built by 2025?
Certainly do. It's a wonderful scheme, and it would be a missed opportunity ultimately, because if one looks at the site as it is at the moment, and the fact that in a lot of ways the setting of St Barnabas Church has actually never been resolved since it was built. This would bring that resolution. It would give a wonderful place for the community, for visitors. In fact, that would become a better jewel that's bigger than the sum of its parts, I would have thought, ultimately. Yes. So,
okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. Good luck in planning. Just moving on, I don't know if we can see the aerial view once again of what the site is like now. There we are, 20 years after the Battle of Jericho, still no development of the site. The consultation ends very shortly. Get your views into planning at City Council very soon via their website. Next week, the Jericho Wharf Trust are holding their own virtual meeting to put their point of view. The time and date is still to be decided. They were invited to put questions tonight, but refused. Jericho Boatyard saga seems it'll run and run and run. Now, moving on to after Easter. My Jericho is taking a well-deserved Easter break until Wednesday, April the 14th, when we come back with a bang. Oxford professor Danny Dorling on North Oxford becoming like Disneyland. As provocative as ever, 5:30 on YouTube. You can book and you can watch. Go to the My Jericho site to find it. And since March 2020, when we anticipated lockdown with the first virtual My Jericho with Councillor Yvonne Constance, week after week we've brought you information, education and entertainment. About 50 My Jerichos in total. You can access them all via YouTube or via the website on myjericho.co.uk. Plenty do. Audiences vary from 100 to 3,000. One of the biggest, and nearly 2,000, for Clive Mair and Impartiality 2 weeks ago. That's had a huge impact. Articles in The Guardian, and if you were watching CNN last Sunday, you would have been able to see Clive there on CNN talking about My Jericho. We're talking about his subject is My Jericho, and so for today Jericho, tomorrow the world. And he's also going to present Mastermind. So he rehearsed on My Jericho and now going to present Mastermind. It's all made possible by the huge technical skills of Phil Barnes in faraway Walton-on-Thames. He's made this product look very, very professional. Huge, huge kudos to him. Now, this all costs money. Let's keep it going. If you'd like to contribute, we have to pay for listings, sites, designs, and so on. Do contribute to the crowd fund if you like what you see. Its sort code is 139626. The account is 48518460, and it's Jericho Good Works. We've had some 3 very generous donations recently, but small donations are very welcome as well. So please do give, and please keep watching. See you on after Easter on April the 14th. And thank you very much indeed, and goodbye.
Yeah.